Now, another job that is easy enough to do is the removal of the batten strips that I put in here. There's one here and another one a little further up, about there. So those are just, I think, 2x2s that are nailed into the joists. I guess where the plywood sheets didn't quite meet the joist, so they put in these batten strips to be able to then screw the plywood into the batten strips. And of course they're in my way, so I have to take them out. And because the batten strip right there, they're extending beyond what I can reach, so I'm just going to use my multi-tool again to make a clean cut there, and just use either a carpenter's hammer or a crowbar to lever them off the joists, and that's them removed as well. Now the next thing is the joists themselves. So I think it's pretty clear from this little pan around that there's only two joists that actually carry the straight edge at this time. And it's this one right here and the one there. All of the others do not touch the straight edge. That one is quite close, but only there. If I move the straight edge further down, the distance there is going to increase. Interestingly enough, the one all the way at the back sits higher than my two reference joists. And the one on this end is the lowest of them all, with what looks like 2.5 centimeters of a gap there between the straight edge and that joist. The good thing is that no matter where I move the straight edge, I could move it a little closer to myself, and it's still the same reference joists that carry the straight edge, this one and that one, and the same if I move it further back. So that's the good news. At least my two reference joists are relatively straight. And how straight? I'm now going to measure out, not perpendicularly, but actually on top of the joist with that little shorter straight edge over there. Now, the one that's close to the door is definitely not level. It would have to be raised a little bit on this side to be perfectly level. And since this is a reference joist, that looks like the first task to me. I'm going to swing around and check the other reference joist. Now this one here is perfectly level. It's right in the water there. Nice. Now sistering up joists means essentially screwing another bit of another joist onto the existing one. I don't just want to use batten strips because they're relatively small pieces of wood, not very wide. So I would worry about their load carrying capacity, and also because they're so small, I would have to screw them into the very top section of the joist, and that would place some strain onto the screws that are sitting very close to the edge of this existing joist. So there is some risk of splintering, like the wood cracking open and splitting. I want to avoid that. Now, looking at these joists here, so this is pretty much the middle of the house. This is the kind of the wall downstairs masonry that runs right down the length of the house. So this is where the two joists meet from each side. So it makes sense that when I sister up the joist that I use the long side and screw it against there, so that I don't have, if I use the short side, this bit of joist that I sister onto it stick up, and then this one being low again. So I'm going to use the long side. Now of course, sistering up all these joists also means that I have to remove these tension brackets, and that is just a very unpleasant, tedious job, because they are not screwed into the timber, they're nailed into it. So first I would have to use a screwdriver to just pry the nail heads out far enough that I can grab onto them with either pincers or my carpenter's hammer to then pull them out. From experience, this is a task that can take frustratingly long. All of the tension brackets are now gone, and I could theoretically start taking my bits of timber to start sistering up the joists, to just clamp them to the existing ones and then finally adjusting them. But these wires are still running through the original joists, and if I have two choices. I can leave them in and cut notches, like really deep, narrow notches into the sister joists, and then just fit them around, and or I can go downstairs, disconnect all of the wires from the ceiling rows and take the light out completely. So I can also take that bit of timber out, because again I would have to notch the bit of timber that I want to sister against the existing joist. And I think I want to leave my timber as intact as possible, and that means disconnecting the light downstairs, taking out the wires, taking out that piece of timber that the light screws into, then threading out the wires all the way into this bay there. And then once I have the joists in, drill holes in them as well, and then thread the wires back in. So this is perfect, even though this is now, let's say, about 2-3 millimeters higher than the existing joist. The level is absolutely perfect. Yeah, perfect here as well. And here where the new one sits flush with the existing one, because it's fine on this side, this one was a bit lower than that. It's still perfectly level across all of the joists, from this reference joist to the other one. So this one just needed straightening out. So with that, I'm just going to mark where I'm going to screw my wood screws in to permanently sister this one to the existing joist. So my first screws are going to go in right about there. It's my initial mark. Every 15 centimeters. Probably a bit excessive, but then especially this side here where the shower tray goes, and that weighs 50 or 60 kilos, so this is going to take a lot of weight. So I want to make sure that I have enough screws in here to transfer the load from my sister joist to the existing joist, which again rests on masonry on either side. I want my screws to sit 6 centimeters from the top edge and 6 centimeters from the bottom edge. So to make my job a bit easier, so I don't have to look at my millimeter measurements the whole time, I'm going to grab some masking tape at the 14 centimeter and 23 centimeter mark, and that's where I'll tap the screws. Time to fit this lighting backplate in place. I've gone with a much wider bit of timber to give me more options when it comes to changing the light downstairs in the future. Just to have a wider base to screw any light fixture into. And there's the final result. Almost all of the joists have been sisted up. So obviously my reference joist hasn't been, and the one in the back hasn't been either. That one I've sanded down so that now the straight edge can lie on top of that as well, without bumping against it, so that's now low enough, because that was the only joist that was sticking up higher rather than dipping lower. And after that it's time to put the tension brackets back into place. Right, the tool is going to insulate these bays or troughs between the joists. And the first step is measuring 36. And here's the result, a nicely double insulated underfloor or subfloor. Traps now resting comfortably on top of the second layer, so that's a plus. And whatever I had left, I already put in the wall between those studs there. Now the next thing before the actual floorboards can go in is the 5mm thick foam strip that go on top of these joists to catch and dampen vibrations that the floorboards take when anybody's walking across them. And now the subfloor is completed, insulation is in, pipes and wires have been routed, and the acoustic strips have been applied to the top side of the joists. For the floorboards I use 18mm thick marine grade plywood sheets, probably overkill, but it helps me sleep better at night. And to make sure that the different sheets formed one solid unified surface, I routed tongue and grooves into the edges to help fit them better together. Now, rather than drawing one line, I went with two, because that's about how thick the joist is. So I marked out the both lines there on the stud-work, and between that's where the joist starts, and we can still see over here where the tape on top of the joist is. So as long as my screw is somewhere between these lines, I know I'm going to drill this sheet straight into the joist underneath. The subfloor is now completed, and I'm going to move on to installing the hidden toilet system and put in some reinforcements into the stud-work, where later on things like the radiator, the undersink cabinet, etc. are supposed to be fastened to the wall. So those are the next steps, but at least the subfloor is done.